It's taken a few days, but the White House is finally starting to get its story straight on what the biggest scandal is that people should be paying attention to that doesn't have to do with Jeffrey Epstein. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt this afternoon.
But at the unusual direction of Barack Obama at the time, the intel community published implausible intelligence suggesting otherwise. Why? To sabotage the incoming president. This is truly one of the greatest political scandals in American history.
So now the White House is on the same page with this supposedly new intelligence of Barack Obama's personal involvement in the investigation into Russia's efforts to influence the 2016 election. That's now the biggest scandal in American history. But earlier this week, there was a different biggest scandal in American history. Here's White House press flack Harrison Fields.
It's the largest cover-up, the largest corruption this nation has probably ever seen. We thought Watergate was a problem. No, we thought Benghazi was a problem. It was. But what we're seeing right now is absolutely insane.
Another former Biden official is testifying before the House Oversight Committee this week as Republicans demand answers regarding the former president's mental decline and use of the auto pen.
And here's Rep. James Comer calling Biden's use of the auto pen the biggest scandal in American history.
The purpose of the investigation is to get the truth to the American people. Look, this is the biggest scandal in the history of American politics. President Trump has said that many times, and I agree 100% with that assessment.
One way to tell that they're lying is that it wasn't even until Wednesday, almost 2 weeks after the Epstein story blew up in their faces, that the White House and supporters like Comer got on the same page about what to call the biggest scandal that people should be paying attention to other than Epstein. Another way to tell that they're lying is that they released these files last week. But yet it wasn't until today that Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard took to the podium in the White House press office to lay out the supposedly damning information that her office released last week. Also keep in mind that the supposedly damning information would have been available to Gabbard's own deputy, John Ratcliffe, who was Director of National Intelligence during the first administration. So why didn't they release it then? Also, this report doesn't even really look like anything that you would see typically released by an intelligence agency. There's no broad overview of the facts that the report will lay out. There's no table of contents. Instead, it's just a timeline of events with snippets of emails that are clearly selectively grabbed to make an argument that somehow Obama was directly involved in the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, which was a real thing, by the way. So the report is kind of a mess. Until Wednesday, the White House couldn't even decide which scandal it wanted to highlight in order to distract people from the Epstein stuff. But the final way to know that none of this is really a big deal and it's probably mostly a lie is that Trump's using the words of hyperbole that he loves so much. Here he is in 2018 talking about Spygate, which is another thing that Trump made up about the investigation into Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election, in which the FBI supposedly put an informant within the Trump campaign, which turned out not to be true.
President Trump responded to news that an FBI informant was in contact with members of his campaign.
If they had spies in my campaign, during my campaign for political purposes, that would be unprecedented in the history of our country.
Here he is last year on the campaign trail, talking about how Joe Biden knew about Hunter Biden's work with Burisma in Ukraine, and how that was a huge scandal.
Joe claimed he knew absolutely nothing about it. I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about my son's business. My son's business? Remember during the debate, I said, what about your son's business? What about China? Nothing to do with China. They took in millions. But so much more money pours in, and Joe, he knew all about it. It was a big lie. That was the big lie. This is the biggest scandal in U.S. history and perhaps the world.
Here he is calling Biden's cognitive decline and apparent use of the auto pen the biggest scandal in American history.
I think that the auto pen is one of the biggest scandals in the history of this country.
So while it's clear that all of this stuff about Obama and the 2016 election is neither a scandal and certainly not the biggest scandal in American history, the Trump administration needs this to be a scandal. That's because Epstein isn't going away. House Republicans can adjourn for their August recess to avoid having to hold a vote on whether or not to pressure the DOJ to release the Epstein files, but Trump's base of MAGA conspiracy theorists still want those files. So Trump is desperately trying to distract them with the biggest fish he thinks he can catch for that conspiracy-addled base of MAGA supporters, Barack Obama. And he'll probably succeed at least a little bit, because you start throwing around stuff about Barack Obama and using the word treason, and a lot of Trump's people will be really fired up about that, maybe even enough to temporarily at least forget about Epstein.